Good morning, everyone. My name is Caitlin from the Ontario Science Centre, and today I'm joined by Adriana from the Geneva Centre for Autism and Dr. Isabelle Hénault, who is the director of the Autism and Asperger Clinic of Montreal. We'll be recording today's session and posting it on our website, so we've got a lot going on, but if you miss anything, you can always go back and watch it again later. Today, our audience might be participating from many different places across Ontario or Canada, even potentially the world, but we are all participating from land that has been inhabited and cared for by Indigenous people since the beginning of time. So before we begin, I would like to start by acknowledging that the Ontario Science Centre, which is in the city of Toronto, is on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. It has been their home for thousands of years and continues to be their home, the home of many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. This land is covered by treaties 13 and 13A within the Mississaugas of the Credit, and we encourage everyone watching today to learn about the peoples, treaties, and histories of the land that we live on. We're going to post a link in the chat of somewhere where you can learn about all the different peoples that live where you are as well, so we can all make sure we know our history. So welcome to everyone. If this is your first time joining us for a sensory-friendly Saturday, we're very happy you're here. And if you've joined us before, we're also very happy you're here. It's great to see you again. Although we're meeting virtually today, we would still love to have some of your participation. So as we go throughout the presentation, we'll be doing a couple little polls just so we can get to know you better. So you can use those to stay engaged and share some of your thoughts. And if you'd like to ask a question, we have a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So you can click there and submit a question anonymously if you'd like to. And we will try our best to answer as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. If we don't get to your question, it's not that it's not important to us, but it just means that we'll have to send you an email later on to make sure that you get the information that you need, but we'll try our best to get to everyone. So just to start, we'd love to learn a little bit about you. So you should see the first poll appear on your screen now. So take a minute to submit your answers. And again, all responses are completely anonymous. We'll only show you a general summary of the results once they're all in. So take a second to answer that and we'll close the poll soon. So get those last few responses in. And thank you for sharing with us. All right, so it looks like a lot of the people here today have some familiarity. We've got some parents, and we've got some educators, some people who are on the ASD spectrum. So lots of different people joining us. Thank you so much for sharing. We're glad that you're here with us. If you didn't know, over the last few years, the Ontario Science Centre has been working in partnership with the Geneva Centre for Autism. We're so glad that Adriana is here with us today. And we've been proud to work together to present Sensory Friendly Saturdays. It's a series of hands-on workshops, presentations, and discussions that take place once a month. The idea is that they're designed to provide an inclusive, accessible, and respectful environment with programming that's appropriate for all ages and abilities. So really, the goal is just to try to create a space where everyone can learn and have fun together. Each month, we try to focus on a different topic relating to the autism spectrum disorder. So we have another poll question that should show up on your screen now, just about where you're at. What is your knowledge relating to ASD? Take a few seconds to answer that. And thank you again for sharing with us your responses. Okay, so most people are saying they're either very knowledgeable or somewhat knowledgeable. And we hope that after today's session, we'll all know a little bit more too and have a little bit more ways that we can relate to one another. Today, we'll be discussing autism and gender and why it's more difficult to diagnose in girls and women, and how researchers are now extending the studies to include other gender diverse people. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce our presenters who will be able to tell us a little bit more about themselves and their engagement with the neurodiverse community. So if you don't mind, can we start with you, Adriana? Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe what you do at the Geneva Centre? Oh, I think you're still muted.
Thank you for inviting me here today. My name is Adriana Karka, and I am the manager of training and product development at Sonderly, which is the training division of Geneva Centre for Autism. And in my role, I work with a creative group of content developers and trainers, and we disseminate knowledge about autism and mental health internationally. And I would like to introduce Dr. Isabelle Hénault. She's the director of the Autism and Asperger's Clinic at Montreal. And I had the pleasure to first meet Dr. Hénault over 10 years ago when she was presenting on her research at our international symposium. Since then, we have collaborated with her on several projects, including invited speaker events and courses. Dr. Isabelle Eno is a sexologist and a psychologist from the Université de Québec à Montréal, and her practice and studies have focused on providing diagnosis, education, and support to children, adolescents, adults, and couples living with autism and Asperger syndrome. Dr. Hénault has developed a relationship and sex education program and works with individuals and groups to increase their understanding of sexuality and conduct, and also conducts relationship counseling. Her first book was Asperger Syndrome and Sexuality with Jessica Kingsley Publishers in 2005. Dr. Hénault is presently collaborating on numerous international research initiatives involving sociosexual education, interpersonal relationships, as well as gender identity. She is the co-author of The Autism Spectrum, Sexuality, and the Law with Dr. Tony Atwood and Nick Dubin, and this is also published by Jessica Kingsley Publishers in London, 2014. And just recently, last year in 2020, she published a book on the female profile of Asperger syndrome, and that was co-authored with Annick Martin at Chenelière Éducation. So I'm going to pass it on to Dr. Isabelle Eno.
Thank you very much, Adriana. It's always nice to see you again. Thank you everyone for inviting me for this presentation. It's my first collaboration with you guys, and maybe there will be more eventually. So I'm really thrilled to spend some time with you talking about female profile and also gender diversity. So right away, I will share my screen because I know time is limited and we have so much to cover today. So just give me a second and I will share. So everything should work. So just very quickly, I work in Montreal with a group of different therapists and specialists, professionals at the Autism and Asperger's Clinic. So we are a multidisciplinary team. If ever you're curious to learn more about our programs, we will send you the link to the clinic website, but also the Facebook of our clinic where we post some information and we share some resources as well. In our team, we have specialists working with children, very young children for diagnostic purposes. We also have some educators, special educator, sexologists like myself, psychologists, neuropsychologists. We also provide diagnostic for teenagers and adults. We work with groups as well. We run many group activity about emotion regulation, understanding the autism diagnostic as well. We have the Asperger's group. I will talk about Asperger's today, of course. And we also work with couples and families. So these are the cover of the books. We will send you a link if ever you're curious. The latest one on the female profile of Asperger's syndrome will be translated soon. We're working on the English translation with Jessica Kingsley again. And in the book, there will be a guide, a clinical guideline to help you in terms of diagnostic purposes. And I will share some information with you and some links today that you can also download during the presentation. So let's talk about girls now. So years ago, as you know, we were thinking and talking about autism mainly in terms of the male profile, because most of the research and questionnaires were designed for males. And it's only quite recent that we started to put more attention in the female profile. Years ago, Christopher Gilberg, he's a psychologist from Sweden, was attending an international conference, and he mentioned in front of the audience Why don't we talk about girls a bit more? And since then, he developed some questionnaires followed by Tony Atwood and his team in Australia. And we now have the unique profile of girls and women. This is briefly what I'll be presenting today. So in the initial work and sample of Hans Asperger's, there was only one girl out of 20 boys. And the male ratio for years was 4 or 5 male for 1 female. The new prevalence that was published last year internationally, in fact, is talking more about 2 male for 1 female. But in my clinical experience, and the same with different colleagues around the world, we have the same amount of girls and boys coming to our clinic now because we have more knowledge and experience. More or less, the profile and abilities in girls and women is described by Ruth Baker, and I think this is excellent. She calls it the invisible end of the spectrum, because many girls and women had fly under the radar when it came to diagnostic, because again, we were using questionnaires targeting male characteristics. Many females coming to our clinic will arrive when they're 20, 30, even 40, 50 years old and older, because they have a lot of coping and camouflaging mechanisms that will eventually hide their characteristics, or they will do a lot of mimicking. It means that they tend to observe other girls when they're younger or other women. Sometimes they watch television, they look at sitcoms, and they will play and replay social interaction. So it means that they have a tendency to disappear in a crowd. They don't like to have attention on them, and it can take longer for them to receive a diagnosis. When we talk about the invisible end of the spectrum, it means that most of these girls and women coming to our clinic have high functioning autism or Asperger's syndrome. Those who have more severe traits of autism are usually picked up by teachers when they're younger. But most of the clinical experience I'll be sharing today is really for teenage girls and young women coming to us. So in the book on the female profile, we have also published clinical guidelines co-written with Valentina Pazin. She is a neuropsychologist in Italy, and Professor Tony Atwood and Bruno Wicker, who is a researcher also in the field of autism. So I will give you access to the French edition. We're about to publish the English one very, very soon. So don't worry, you'll have the link. We will send you the English one maybe in, I think in a few days, few weeks, it should be all finished. And we provide 65 questions and common answers. It means that when we explore all the female traits, we were able to divide based on the DSM-5 and validated questionnaire for females, all the subtleties, all the camouflaging traits, and we provide answers that if you are a girl or a woman on the spectrum, this is more or less what the woman or girl should answer. We decided to publish the guideline for free around the world. Already it's been translated in Italian and other language, and we want to share the knowledge. So for families, for females themselves, and also for professionals who may have more limited knowledge on the female profile. So in the guide, we explore childhood experience, academics as well, the concept of self-identity that is very important in females, this quest for understanding their difference, social interactions, social mistakes that sometimes they make, their perception of the world and the environment that is very interesting. So they have a unique view. They think in a different way, and they also adapt their behaviors depending on their perception. We explore relationships in general, and also what we call the sixth sense, their very unique connection with animals, nature, and sometimes children. We explore their sensory profile, their perception as well, and we will then ask questions about the cognitive profile, their way of thinking, attention into detail, long-term memory abilities, for example. We also conclude with general health. This is really for clinical purposes because we've been making more and more research on the autoimmune system, connection with autism, endocrinology system as well. And there seems to be some very interesting news and research, including the health of girls and women that can be different from neurotypical girls and women, especially around puberty and also when they reach older years and see how their immune system will develop. We also explore sexuality. This is not initially part of the diagnostic purposes, but when girls or women are sharing some questions, some experience relating to sexuality, unfortunately, sometimes history of abuse, we will also take this into account because mainly for us as psychologists, the goal is not to stick a label to someone and to say, this is your diagnostic, is really to recognize the abilities, the traits, characteristics to provide adapted support and strategy. Now, the new hypothesis, I'm really thrilled to share this with you about female and girls on the spectrum, is relating to camouflaging. So there has been some research published lately, and we found that for many girls and women, this is adaptation strategy. So they camouflage their difficulties, their traits, and it's really all inside. So that will provide later diagnostic because the more you camouflage, the less we will see your traits and characteristics. And this is why many of them, when they initially arrive at the clinic, they've been through a lot of specialists. And many of them had received a diagnostic of ADHD, attention deficit disorder, with or without hyperactivity. It can be personality disorder, mainly borderline personality. It can be bipolar. It can be lots of other diagnostic. And eventually, when we really look into details about the camouflaging strategies, we will see that eventually they suffer a lot from their difference. And this identity quest is very, very strong. So they want to learn about who they are, they want to understand. And when we relieve these camouflaging strategies, we will be able to explore their true identity. So there are three main strategies that they develop. One is observation. They observe a lot. They are very attentive and they look at other people's behaviors. They imitate behaviors and they can also assimilate. So they develop different scripts. So for example, when they have to meet maybe new students at school or family gathering, they will think about what to say, different, rescue phrases, how to relate. So they observe a lot of people and they imitate. So this is also masking strategy that we see a lot in girls and women. So there has been a very interesting book published not too long ago by Dr. Sarah Bargiela called Camouflaging. So this is very interesting. And also I want to share the book from my colleagues, Barbara Cook and Michelle Garnett, called Spectrum Woman. And this book is excellent. You will find different chapters, topics about social interaction, work, family life, identity. And there is a chapter from Kristen Jenkins. She is also based in Ontario. She's a very good colleague of mine for many years, and she obtained her diagnostic later on in life. And it's very interesting to see her path. So I would definitely recommend these books. And also, if you are curious, you can look at the Camouflaging Autistic Traits Questionnaire. We will send you two different links, one from the original paper research and the other one where you can find the online questionnaire for camouflaging. So that could be a pre-diagnostic interest. So this is not a diagnostic questionnaire, but that will be combined with the other profile and protocol that we use at our clinic. So this is brand new information. If we slip slowly through gender identity, also this is another special interest in my research and clinical work. There's more and more attention from professionals who now have this kind of a double vision of autism, but also gender identity. And we're getting more and more clinical information from Scandinavian countries who are very advanced in terms of gender identity, fluidity, and exploration. We now use at our clinic and with our colleagues a protocol in terms of gender quest. So if a teenager or an adult is questioning himself, herself about gender identity, we now have some very interesting information, steps to follow, making sure that we really understand the main quest, and we can then give some support and strategy. And we explore the complexity of identity. So very soon, I think it's going to be in fall time, if I'm right, at Jessica Kingsley, this book will be published, Working with Autistic, Transgender, and Non-Binary People, edited by Marianti Curti. She is a very famous researcher in UK. She's been doing a lot of work around gender identity. And I was asked to write a chapter in the book. So I was very, very happy to share my experience. And this is what I'll be presenting in the next slide. So just before, I would like to share this concept that I think is just fascinating. In 2015, Canadian researchers Davidson and Thomas wrote a paper called Ghost of Gender. And I thought this was ideal, fantastic, because it opened up so much about the construct of gender identity that is a social construct. So they did a research with 75 subjects with autism, first-hand account, online survey, there were blogs and autobiography. And they realized from their research and their discussion that for many individuals on the spectrum, gender is a construct that doesn't even exist because they're not necessarily compliant to the strong social educational model of what we call gender binary, male or female. So more or less, the majority of participants were saying, I am a person, I am not a gender. I thought that was fascinating because this is also the experience I get from my students and adults coming to us. So autism or Asperger's syndrome does not conform to social norms. So they will go with how they feel inside, and this will be a broad journey. So I totally agree with their paper and their conclusion. And also, if I go back in 1996, there was also some hypotheses about gender identity. They called it disorder at the time. I don't agree. I don't think this is a disorder. I don't use the term because I think it pathologized again. It's very negative and it's almost like putting people in squares. And I don't like categories like this. I think that gender is fluid, it's more flexible. So the author here was exploring that there was 3 to 10 times more cases of autistic or Aspie's individual in gender clinics. And this is also the same ratio that we find with my colleagues, mainly in Sweden. Just to give you a very quick idea, the gender clinic at Karolinski Hospital, this is one of the largest gender clinics in Europe. They are based in Sweden. We collaborate with them for many years, and every time they have a request for gender reassignation or exploration or surgery, they now have an assessment of autism. So they also think that there would be up to 40% of individuals on the spectrum who would be either flexible, maybe sometimes they're confused, and sometimes they will go up to exploring in gender transition. So this is very interesting. Gender exploration is usually around puberty in neurotypical individuals. It means that teenagers, through their peer groups, association, relationship, they will eventually explore and make a decision about, I'm in a female body, I feel like a girl, I dress as a girl, etc. But we see that there can be a delay. And also, this quest is not exactly the same for those on the spectrum. We know that theory of mind will also be implied. It means the ability to understand how other people think and feel. So if they are not so aware about peer group, they will again go back with how they feel inside. So that can lead to more fluidity or flexibility. I'll explain this. So these are some of my hypotheses that I discuss in the book from Marianti Curti. The first category of questions that we explore is sometimes with some of our teenagers and adults, there can be underlying conflict, not accepting the diagnostic of autism or Asperger's syndrome or other conditions related, or not feeling good with who they are. For example, I have some boys and young teenage males who may say that they feel more accepted by girls. So the feminine environment seems to be more open, less bullying or intimidation, less teasing because they may be different. So the social isolation, they feel lack of experience with friends, sometimes not having a boyfriend, girlfriend. They may think as a solution, becoming a new persona. So this is sometimes underlying conflict. They may want to change their name, and they sometimes come to see me and say, Isabel, give me a letter. I want hormones. I want transitioning. I say, hold on a second. Working with me can take a while because I want to make sure that this is the wise and the right decision. If yes, I'll follow the person and we have this protocol I'll be sharing with you. But if there is an underlying conflict, we need to resolve it first, because transitioning may not be the solution. So we will explore if there is a conflict. There can be confusion or curiosity due to the delay in maturity. Always remember that chronological age with autism and Asperger's syndrome may be, let's say, 18 years old, but there can be a delay in social maturity or emotion maturity. So this gap may be a few years behind. So this is why if I work with a young adult, the maturity can be more like a teenager. And as a teenager, maturity, they explore. So that's perfectly fine for me. So that could be a transition phase due to lack of experiences. Sometimes it's a quick fix. They say, again, if I become a boy or a girl, maybe my life will be different. I say, yes, that's a possibility, but let's explore the idea. So we will provide positive experience with safe boundaries where they explore being more fluid, flexible. And then it's going to give me time with my colleague to explore the concept of self-identity. And this is where I find that many of them, it's the transition phase. So if we want to reduce the anxiety they may face or depression, we will explore with parents, giving them a chance sometimes to be just what we call gender neutral. And this is more common in autism, non-binary. And there can be third hypothesis, flexibility, that I see definitely in 30-40% of my clients, where in this 30-40%, about 5-10% of them will eventually transition partially or total transition. So we will explore how they feel inside versus social norm. They have less social influence and experience. They call themselves gender neutral, non-binary. Sometimes they just 2 weeks ago, I was seeing a teenager and he prefers to call himself gender queer. I'm fine with that. As long as we explore this flexibility, we accept this difference. And sometimes they will wear neutral clothes for sensory aspect and they want to avoid attention as well. We will explore male, female characteristics that can be shared, and we will look at the continuum. Sometimes working with some of my teenagers and adults, I see that it could be a fetishism, wanting to wear the opposite sex clothing. That's one category, that's one type of work. We work with some who wants really to cross-dress. Other clients, they really want hormonal therapy to kind of neutralize, or I would say maybe just become more neutral, genderly speaking. So initially, when we go to a specialized clinic, if you just look for hormonal therapy, they were not so keen because they were saying, if you want to transition, you should have all the other steps required. We find with my colleagues, we have a committee at my clinic working with our teenagers and adults who wants to, start hormonal therapy. They just want to neutralize their body, the way they look, and not having to be defined as male or female. So we hope, we are working hard on this at the moment. We hope that there could be, a sub-diagnostic, because you need a diagnostic of gender dysphoria in general if you want to go for transitioning. We hope that autism, Asperger's syndrome, and seeking for this neutrality could be allowed. We have positive experience at the moment just to seek for hormonal therapy if this is what they want. And with other students and adults, eventually in the due course of their development, because we continue to work together on other aspects of their life about the transition. And sometimes they may wish for partial transition, or others, they will seek for total surgery transition. And this is a possibility. So we've been working with some of them for years now. I like the term that Marianne Curti invented. It's called Autism. I think this is brilliant. She's very good. So Autism for Autism Gender. So we are trying to explore more this gender expression concept and accept the difference in autism and Asperger syndrome. So if we work with individuals who wish to transition, we have this adapted protocol where we use a questionnaire that was designed initially to explore gender identity, but we adapted to autism and Asperger syndrome because we know our students and adults, they think in a different way, they express themselves differently. And we want to make sure that if they transition, they'll be able to get the right support and services from other professionals. And even if they want to go for a surgery, we need to work in teams. So we are working closely with specialists in Montreal who now know about autism and Asperger syndrome, because initially some of our students and adults were rejected from transitioning clinic because they used to say, we're not so keen, not so sure about autism, Asperger syndrome. We don't have enough knowledge, so we prefer not to work with them. So that was chaotic and sometimes very depressing, as you can imagine, for some of our clients, and some started to have suicidal thoughts because that was really their path and their decision, and following them sometimes for months and years. I was really beside them and saying, yes, this is the right path. So now we have a lot of community services. We do a lot of education for support and information in the community. So if you are curious, you can download these free guidelines for autism, gender dysphoria, and what they may call incongruence in gender for adolescents from Strang and his colleagues. So this is the guidelines we use at the clinic. If you go online, if ever you're French speaking, there's also a French version. And I think this is very interesting. I know it's a sensitive topic, but I'm okay to discuss it in large group. I'm very careful when I work with my students and adults because they think in a different way. I want to make sure that this is the right decision for them, because we don't want them to regret eventually and maybe start transitioning when sometimes, as you know, if you start hormonal treatment, there will be changes for the rest of your life. If you go for partial surgery, these are, long-term changes. So wanting to make sure, and Strang and his colleagues also refer to taking time to assess the situation, assess the individual, make sure that he or she understands all the steps required. And as an example, part of our protocol, we also assess executive function. So these skills are very important because it means if you want to go for hormonal therapy or partial transition, you'll have lots of appointments with psychologists, doctors, checkups, etc. We want to make sure that our students and adults will be well organized. They can prioritize also the treatment, and also we work closely with family because many of them may stay at home for a longer period. So we hope to have family on board, otherwise it can put a lot of stress on our students and adults. So I totally agree with Strang and his colleagues. So have a look if you are curious and interested. So thank you so much for listening. Time is short for me today. Honestly, just on the female profile, I have a full day presentation. I have so much information to share. The same for gender identity. It's a full day training. So I hope that was practical for you, and maybe it was highlighting some of the information that you wanted to learn about. So thank you so much for listening. I will just then stop sharing my screen, and it's going to be time for question and answer.
Thank you so much, Isabelle, for sharing that with us. I think that there's just so much to talk about. As you said, it could take a very long time to get through it all, but I think it means that there's going to be a lot of rich discussion, and we have a lot of questions coming in already, actually. So we'll just get started right away with this one. Actually, maybe Adriana could answer some of these too. Someone is asking about, as an adult, how would you go about getting diagnosed, particularly since you talked about a lot of adult women being diagnosed later on?
So one of the first thing I would recommend is really to download the clinical guideline, and the English one will follow shortly. So many women, they go to a specialist when they're in their 30s, 40s, and over, and they don't feel that they are understood by a professional, because they say, if you would have autism Asperger syndrome, you should have received a diagnostic earlier in life, as in fact now we know due to the camouflaging this is not their reality. So bring the questionnaire so professionals can see all the different items. And also in the guideline we provide all the questionnaires adapted for females, girls, teenagers, and adult women as well. So when you combine all these screening questionnaires and you see the traits emerging, that will give more credibility. And this is why we wrote the book, because so many females coming to see me and my colleagues said they don't feel that they are credible. So they go to these professionals saying, for example, I'm making eye contact. So they told me I cannot have autism. I'm having a partner. So they told me you can't be an ASPE. I work. So these are stereotypes about autism and Asperger's syndrome. So in the book and in the guideline, this is what we all refer to. We break down these stereotypes and we talk about really the female profile in detail. So that could be a good way for females to go for a diagnostic. Back in Montreal now, due to the COVID situation, we do diagnostic online. So the Board of Psychologists of Quebec allow us finally. So that was very important, because otherwise we were, you know, piling back and waiting until we would go back at the clinic. But now we are allowed to do them online. And I know probably at the Geneva Centre, you're able to refer people and also to work, Adriana, with adults.
Yeah, actually, to follow up with that, Adriana, would you mind letting us know about what kind of resources there are for adults who've been diagnosed on the spectrum?
So at Geneva Centre for Autism, we do work with individuals all across the age span, and we do have adult programming. So I would suggest that if you have any information, any needs for information about our services for adults, to email info@autism.net, and you will then be able to receive information on our programming. We also have programs specifically for girls as well. So we do have ways for you to learn more about our services by first going through info@autism.net.
Thank you so much. We've talked a bit about camouflaging, so a few questions have come in about that. Is it more commonly observed in neurotypical females than males, or is it the same as those around the spectrum?
No, we really see it more on the spectrum, and this is why they developed the camouflaging questionnaire for autism. We also have now information about males who camouflage, you know, who have autism and Asperger's syndrome. If ever you're interested, I will send you more info. There is a very good website on male camouflaging that just came out about 2-3 weeks ago, but we see it more in females in general, because that's a short answer, but by nature, girls and women are more sociable than males on the spectrum. So they suffer more from being isolated when they're young. So they want to join in groups. They observe, they wait, and then they can, you know, join. But since there's lots of social mistakes, this is where sometimes they will be criticized by other girls or groups. And so naturally, so this is what we discovered with Hall and his colleagues and Simon Baron-Cohen in Cambridge. They discovered that, in fact, it's a spontaneous, very natural strategy to observe, imitate, assimilate, and also have these script or masking. And that's going to help them, in fact, navigate socially, make more friends, because they suffer more from not having these friends or being alone. As what we see in young boys on the spectrum, they may have one friend or no friend, but they seem in general, that's a bit stereotyped, but still, they seem to be less anxious about this situation and less depressed about being more alone. So this is why girls and women, initially more sociable, develop masking strategy and camouflaging. So there's compensation. So it means you learn script, you learn behaviors from observation. There's also masking. So not showing or making an effort to look sociable. So this is, I see this in many interviews with women. I had one 3 days ago, and she said, Isabel, at work, I'm like playing a role. I have a colleague of mine who's very sociable, popular. So I look at her, I even sometimes imitate her tone of voice, her gesture. I dress up like her. When I'm back home, I'm myself, but I work, I will mask. So this is also part of the camouflaging and assimilation, meaning a bit pretending, and this is positive, I don't see this in a negative way at all, is really using these strategies to be more sociable. So you'll find some information if ever you go at autismresearchcenter.com. This is Simon Baron Cohen as well. And the camouflaging questionnaire that we'll be sharing with you also has all the information.
Thank you. You've mentioned a few different websites. So just if you're watching at home, we are going to be sharing all of these links. We've put some of them in the chat, but we'll also make sure that we email them out to you. So you don't have to worry about copying and pasting the chat. They'll all be available to you after this presentation. So we were just talking about camouflaging and how that can be really good socially for a lot of girls and women. But can that also cause stress on some people? And if so, how can that be alleviated?
Yes, so that's the other side of the medal. So it's costing a lot of energy, because when you think about being vigilant, having your script in mind, knowing how to behave. So this takes a lot of energy, and many women, they will say to me, Isabel, I'm burnt out. This is how they arrive at the clinic. They say, because I'm so tired of all the time trying, making up, some social skills and abilities and behaviors. So when they feel more anxious or depressed, we use emotion regulation strategies at the clinic. That could be another presentation eventually. I know with the Geneva Centre, we've talked about this a lot in the past, based on cognitive behavior strategies. So we help women and boys and men as the same, being more in contact with how they feel. And then we ask them to think about the intensity of their emotion. So we make them more aware of their symptoms, the intensity, how they feel. And then we have emotion regulation strategies that we call the toolbox. So for each of our participants, we will develop a toolbox that's lots of, for example, relaxation strategies, physical activities, getting in contact with people that you care, having positive thoughts that we call antidotes. So we work really with cognitive strategies that are adapted for people on the spectrum, and it works very well. So the cost is, yes, it's very draining to be all the time in hypervigilance. And also, in fact, when women come to us, they say, I'm tired of masking. I want to know who I am. I want to understand. I want to be my true self. And that's why having the diagnostic usually is a relief. And many women, they say, after all, they're so happy because finally they understand their difference, and they won't have to think that maybe they have mental health issue, or most of the time they think in worst, they make it worse, thinking since no one can find the answer, maybe I may be psychotic, and it has nothing to do with that. So that's usually a relief. It makes sense, and that's going to be the starting point of having strategies, sometimes using, again, the emotion remediation strategy.
So you've mentioned that sometimes women are diagnosed with ADHD instead of autism. How closely related are these two diagnoses, and is it common to have both?
Yes, 70%. And 2 weeks ago, I had a supervision with Tony Atwood. He's a good colleague of mine, and we still discuss recently. We were talking about female profile. We're finishing the guideline in English. And Tony said it can be up to 80% with girls. Initially, we were talking about ADHD in males, not in females so much. So we see that there is a very strong combination of autism, Asperger syndrome, and ADHD. In fact, it's part of their traits and symptoms. So this is very common that I work with some children and adults who will also have these traits and similarities. In other cases, the first diagnostic is ADHD, and then autism or Asperger's will come up. But to be honest with you, I'm going to say something a bit tricky here, and I'm okay with that. We can share, we can discuss. I'm always curious because, just an example, again, the young woman I met 3 days ago, she has a first diagnostic of ADHD when she was a teenager. Now she's a young 20s. And she said to me, Isabel, I can copy books on horses. I'm so interested in horses. I can recopy entire books and spend numerous hours focusing on my task. When I search about horses, that's her passion, I can stay online, write notes, catalog, and organize the information for hours. When I'm working with horses, that's her job. She said, I can brush, clean, give medication. I'm with them and I'm super focused. am I ADHD? You see? And I was thinking, that's very interesting because ADHD, usually you start an activity or whatever that reading, 10 minutes later, you forget what you were doing, you're starting something else, and then you go from one activity to another. You don't necessarily fully, imply yourself. So that's why sometimes I'm curious because I think ADHD, yes, is very common, but when they put attention in their specific topic of interest or passion, ADHD disappear. So that's something to talk about. But Christopher Gilberg was the first one to talk about females, and he said ADHD and autism in girls could or should be one and only diagnostic. So he has research about that, saying that from his conception, this is the same diagnostic.
So it's interesting that you say that. So is there any, is the treatment or support for ADHD and autism the same? And actually maybe Adriana, are there supports for those with ADHD at the Geneva Centre as well? And with that in mind, how would one get in touch or to make an appointment about this kind of thing?
So same idea where absolutely we do have individuals with different profiles coming into Geneva Centre, and we would start by having an intake. So we do have an email as well called intake@autism.net, and that could start the process.
Awesome. So after that, they go through the intake, then we'll have an appointment. So yeah, in terms of supports for ADHD and autism, are they the same? How would they differ?
I have our dog right next to us, so
no worries. We understand.
I just we had the door open and a few things change. So absolutely, during those intake appointments, more information would be learned, and then the referrals would be made to the right services.
Thank you. So just to give us a little bit of a heads up on time, we have reached about 11:45. That doesn't mean that we're done. We're going to keep taking more questions, but it does mean that if you haven't asked your question yet, now's the time to get it in. And if we haven't gotten to your question yet, don't worry. We will either answer it live or we will send you an email back about it. So we've talked a lot about girls and women so far. I'm going to switch over a little bit now to talking more about gender identity. Is there a difference between gender identity and gender expression?
That's a very good question. That's a wise one. I believe in autism and Asperger syndrome, gender expression is the right term. It's the right way to consider gender identity because it is so complex. And I always say, and we laugh a lot, we joke around with clients, and I say, everyone tells you that you're rigid, black and white, but I think neurotypical people are much more rigid when it comes to gender identity. We are very binary model. As I said, 30–40% of the students I work with in adults are more flexible, and they will integrate without a conflict, male-female characteristics, and they see this as being rich, and this is the diversity, and I'm really in favor of this concept. And it doesn't mean that someone will become a trans person, because this is where I think people assume too quickly that if you are gender flexible, queer, non-binary, or Autism, eventually you'll go for surgery. Not at all. So we need to shift, I think, our perception, our way of dealing with gender identity, understanding that this flexibility is part of autism. And I haven't seen as much flexibility or gender expression with the true self in any other areas or any other clients' conditions. It's really seems to be related to autism Asperger syndrome. So this is fascinating. So the social norms, as I explained, don't have the same role. And I think this flexibility is really going with the true self. I always say to my clients that this is what I like about them, and this is what I admire, in fact, is they are who they are. I know life can be difficult for some of them. That's why I'm a psychologist and sexologist, so I try to support them as much as I can. But inside this diversity, I think, is probably more true more connected with the true self. And between you and I think a lot of neurotypical individuals don't give them, they don't necessarily have access, or they don't want to give access to their true gender expression due to social norms and how people will perceive me and all this. So I think we have a lot to learn from Autism theory and hypothesis and those who are expressing their gender in a more fluid way.
That's really great to think about. For parents who might be watching this, do you have any tips or suggestions on how they can talk to their kids and teens about gender identity?
Yes, yes, definitely. So this is interesting. When I work with families, if they have a younger child or teenager, sorry, who may question or ask about, gender difference, etc. One of the first things that we explore is body changes. Because when you go through puberty and you have autism or Asperger syndrome, that will lead to a lot of changes. You lose control over your body. Sexual function will start also to be developed through hormonal changes. So this could explain for some of our teenagers the questions, the discomfort that they feel within their body, not necessarily because they will be non-binary or trans. It's maybe due to the transition and not knowing what it is to be a teenager. And many of my young students, they say, Isabel, I don't want to be a teenager. And I say, why? They say, because I know what it is to be a child. I don't know what it is to be a teenager. And they're so clever. I say, you're absolutely right. So let's explore. So for parents, what I do is we share a lot of books with pictures, drawings for younger ones, but I'm really keen on real pictures. And there are some very good educational material. It's the right thing, because I don't necessarily like black and white drawings for someone on the spectrum. It doesn't make sense. Let's show them real body changes so they can then learn. And in other words, it's going to normalize these change. We talk about the fears sometimes. And let me talk about a little bit about sexuality, if I'm allowed to. Nothing too graphic, don't worry, but I'm a sexologist, so for me, this is part of my daily life to talk about sexuality. But when, for example, boys may start to have erection, spontaneous erection as a teenager, that can create for some discomfort because they're not used to it. They don't really know this feeling sensation. And the sensory aspect is very strong, hyposensory reaction. So that could be combined to body transition, having erection, not feeling so good in their body because that's a new reaction, and then questioning their identity. For example, some boys, teenagers will say to me, since I had erection, I would like to remove my penis. So if I remove my penis, does it mean that I'm a girl? So I say, hold on a second. Let's work step by step with the sensory profile, understanding, normalizing sexual reaction as well. And that may be just a phase where you're adapting to lots of changes. The same for girls when they grow breasts. Sometimes they feel discomfort and they say, this is new, it's not part of me. So am I a male? Not necessarily. It's not because you have discomfort that necessarily you will transition, but others, some of my teenagers, adults transitioning at the moment, they may have this discomfort, for many, many years. So for parents, we talk about puberty, transitions in the body. We reassure also their children that this is a normal phase of development. It's not an easy one. So we use a lot of visuals as well to make sure that they fully understand. And if needed, they can also join groups. We do sex education groups for teenagers and young adults as well at the clinic and everywhere in the world now. I've trained the Geneva Centre staff many times. They're excellent. And that will answer so many questions about everything you can imagine: relationship, emotions, sexual behaviors, gender, orientation as well. We didn't talk about sexual orientation today, but that's another very interesting topic. And going through sex education groups will also help many teenagers in terms of information that maybe they misunderstood or they didn't have, to reassure them. So that would be my main comment for parents at the moment.
That's excellent, thank you. From a lot of our discussion today, it seems like, and I think a lot of us know this, that gender constructs, especially being binary, it's quite illogical. So do you think this is the main reason why people on the autism spectrum tend not to ascribe to like stereotypical gender roles?
Yeah, definitely. And they say, why should I define myself with my gender? I'm a person. There was a paper also written by a researcher with autism and said, I'm a person, I am not a gender. So when I read that, I thought that was very interesting as well. And there are some research at the moment in UK and also with Marianne Ticorti and all her team stating more and more that with autism again, this concept is a social construct. So let's go with the real true gender expression. And my view, if I can conclude on that, is really not to pathologize, because as psychologists, you know, we are trained to give labels to people. I hate that. So I'm not giving labels to people. I want to understand them, and I want really to go inside how they feel in their way of thinking, in their head, in their heart, and everything. And that's why I'm really removing these diagnostic of dysphoria, gender identity disorder, and let's just look at the person. And it's not everyone on the spectrum, okay? Because otherwise, I think the ratio would be much higher, but that's almost a third. So that's why for parents to really understand, accept as well that this could be a possibility, not to reject their child because that's going to create a lot of pressure. Some of them may have suicidal ideas if they feel that their parents don't understand or they reject this idea. And always remember that the flexibility is part of being autistic. And I think that's the beauty of it.
That's such a great answer. Absolutely, is so much beauty in that. We are starting to run out of time, but there are still lots of questions. So again, we will make sure that we send out some answers to these questions. Again, sorry if we have not been able to answer them. I think we'll take one more question if that's okay. This question is about, is it typical for young people to decide to interact with the opposite gender to avoid rejection?
I'm sorry, I kind of missed the beginning of this. Sorry, there was something with my headphones. Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yes, no problem. Yeah. So they're asking, is it typical for young people to decide to interact more with the opposite gender in order to avoid rejection from those of the same gender?
Yes. That is especially for boys. When they're young, boys can be very harsh and critical about boys who are different. And this is why some boys that I work with may interact with the girls. Girls will have them in the group, kind of supervise them or cared for them. And this is why sometimes it can lead for some boys starting to question themselves. Do I want to become a girl? Maybe it has nothing to do with it. I would say this is functional because you feel better. So in these cases, what I do is if they want to avoid bullying, teasing, and sometimes teenagers will say to me, I will just go a bit further. They say, Isabel, I'm not popular with girls. So if I become a girl, that's going to be easy to have a boyfriend. I say, oh, hold on. That may be a quick fix. Let's explore further. And with some adults as well, one of them, he said, I want to become a woman because I never had any romantic experience in my life. So that was his first request. Working with him, in fact, we discovered that what he needed was building self-esteem, confidence, social skills, communication abilities. So we worked for a year with him, and eventually he felt he was more confident. He joined the group, a community group, and I met him about a year later, and he presented his girlfriend to me. And I said, I'm so happy for you. I said, what about the gender quest? He said, that's gone because I have my girlfriend. So that's why I say we have to be careful and navigate. Socially speaking is very hard for them. So that's a large part of the work we do, is really building these skills so they feel more confident, so then they can have a better network and more positive social experience.
Speaking of those social experiences, as far as I understand, the Geneva Centre runs a lot of social groups for all different ages. Do you mind speaking to that a little bit, Adriana?
We do. We've had programming to develop social skills and relationship skills and different ways to get together and join on special and passions and interests. So same idea. If you have any questions about that, you can start by emailing us. Start the process about finding out more about our groups and our abilities to help your family to provide social involvement opportunities for individuals.
Great. So thank you both so much for sharing today. And thank you to everyone who has been following along and joining us. We've had a lot of comments come in, just people saying thank you to both of you for being able to share everything that you have, and so openly and clearly too. So thank you very, very much. Do either of you have any final words for our audience?
Yes, definitely. And I would just say that that was a very wise choice of topics that you made. Honestly, when I received the invitation, I was so thrilled. I said, these are the hot topics now in the autism world, talking about girls, females, finally recognizing their profile and giving them a chance, to learn some skills, abilities, and eventually be happy with who they are, and also the gender quest, the gender fluidity. So that's why I was so thrilled. Thank you very much for having me, and I hope to see you again, maybe in another occasion.
And I wanted to thank you as well. We continue a wonderful collaboration with the Science Center. You are always innovative. You're always seeking new knowledge. It's wonderful. I also wanted to thank Isabelle Hénault. I always learn so much from you every time, and you're so relevant, and your research is always forward thinking. So I really appreciate the ability to have you here with us today. Thank you, Caitlin, for the invitation.
Absolutely. I mean, it has been such a delight to be able to hear from both of you, and to be able to hear about some new upcoming research that it really is cutting edge at this point. So that's really special for us. So thank you to both of you. Thank you everyone for sharing your questions and your comments. Again, we will get back to you if we have not already done so. We also invite you to subscribe to our newsletter for any details about upcoming events. As I mentioned before, Sensory Friendly Saturdays happens every month with a new topic every month. So if you'd like to hear more, just subscribe to our newsletter. We've put the link in the chat. Or you can find more about Sensory Friendly Saturdays on the Plan Your Visit section of our website, ontariosciencecentre.ca. That's also where you can find videos of past Sensory Friendly Saturdays. So you'll find ones on crafting and race and all sorts of different topics there. So definitely feel free to check that out. And that's also where today's session will be posted later on. So I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. And if so, we'd love to hear of what you thought of today's events and any suggestions you might have for future Sensory Friendly Saturdays. So if you can, please take a couple of minutes after the event closes to answer just a very brief survey that will open in your internet browser once Zoom closes. So thank you so much for joining us. Feel free to join us again on our next event on Saturday, July 10th, and stay safe and have a good weekend. Thank you for joining us. Bye, everyone.